I'm here to talk about building an actual working hybrid SDI IP facility. Something I imagine many of you are actually looking to do in the near future. I've actually got one operational at the AP in New York. It's been up and running for several months, our design and our build. We've got another one in construction, will be up and running in another month, and I've got a third one in design. So I'm talking to you about actual real systems. We're a systems integrator. We build these things. We did the integration for the interop demo here, and I'm not going to tout my own horn more than I have to. So a little background on the system I'm talking about that we actually have up and running. It was the Associated Press in New York. They were moving their headquarters from one building to another. They really have no downtime because none of their clients would accept that there's no news delivered for 2-3 days. And they knew they wanted to go down the IP path because that's where future development, future delivery all was, but they were also scared. So why IP? They wanted to dip a toe in the water. They wanted to build a facility that was not completely IP dependent because they were worried about it, and their whole business model depends on timely delivery. But they wanted to be extensible into the future. They also knew that all their future facilities were going to be IP based. And so they wanted to do some control over a lessons learned process without jeopardizing the core business before they went on to redo any of their other facilities around the world. So the IP, they wanted to go IP also because they knew as we move forward with new resolutions, new frame rates, the infrastructure would inherently adapt. Really. Let's try this again. And that the infrastructure was extensible, they could grow it. I don't want to just read my slides. I actually did this to generate a lot of Q&A, but that's going to be tough in this environment, and I apologize for that. There was a recognition that as they went forward, right now we have all the devices bringing in inbound feeds and sending out outbound feeds. It's all SDI. As we move forward, more and more stuff was going to be IP connected natively. So that's where the growth was going to be. Also, the facility was being built. The core was on the 18th floor with studios, ingest control, master control, and then the newsroom was on the 5th floor. The administrative offices and the meeting rooms were on 19 and 20. And IP allows the ability to do really distributed routing that we have not been able to, if you have a huge core router and you have to home run everything back to a tremendous amount of cabling, there are costs to doing it in IP like this, but there's big advantages in terms of management. I'm not going through details. I'm trying to do an overview of the facility, but if anybody has questions, raise a hand, interrupt. I'll try to repeat the question so everybody can hear. Come on, you can do it. Distributed routing, I hit that already. Okay, so why SDI? Why build as a hybrid? Why not just build a new facility? So in December 2015, having your whole business dependent on IP was more than a little scary. So that's where the project started. SDI is proven. They knew that they could deliver a working system in SDI. All the live inbound feeds and outbound feeds were all handed off as SDI, even though they were generally delivered as compressed IP or ASI streams from the carriers. The handoffs at the back of the carrier equipment was all BNCs. The real-time compressed feeds that they were getting on things like Nimbras and LTN, stuff like that, the protocols on those were not compatible with any of the IP routing of studio video over IP uncompressed, so we couldn't use that as IP. Again, those devices all had SDI I/O. So lingua franca in late 2015, early 2016 was all SDI. So continuing along the why SDI, another thing was they had to ingest everything. A news operation like the AP had to be able to take in 576, 480, 30, 25, 24, 2398, 720, 10. It didn't matter. They had to be able to take it in. All their editing is 1080i 50 right now, with the whole system designed extensible to 1080p 50. But everything had to be adaptable, and there was a ton of conversion equipment you could get for SDI to convert pretty much anything to your house standard. But again, in that time period, there was very little that you could get in the IP domain that would do it. Also, all of their old facility gear, all the monitors and everything, could be reused in the new facility, could be built up. That we didn't reuse a lot of it in the initial build, but they wanted the ability to take a monitor that was on somebody's desk last year and put it on somebody's desk next year. So, in discussions of the hybrid system, there were different options about how to divide the system. Now, this is where I think that 90% of the people here will be fighting this battle. Where do you make the break? What do you do as IP? What do you do as SDI? Because we all have SDI facilities, or most of us do. One of the suggestions that we talked about was to take all the facility I/O where we knew we were getting SDI, make that SDI and make the system core IP. But basically there was a trepidation, there was a fear that if anything didn't work on the IP domain, that they were going to lose the core business. There was also discussion of making the facility core SDI and building all our extensions, all our remote geographic locations as IP, which was basically where we went, but we built the core. Let me see what I haven't looked at these slides in a couple days, sorry folks. So the considerations were how to grow it. The growth was going to be, everybody knew the growth was going to be in the IP domain. The SDI was going to be largely fixed. So typically, 5 years ago, if you're building an SDI router and you had 500 sources day one, you'd frame it out for 1,000 sources because you knew you were going to grow, and you would just short load the cards. We took a different approach. We did day one, framed everything out, filled everything out for day one in SDI, and assumed our growth was going to be IP because it was much more extensibility. Of course, the other big thing was fear. There was frankly, it was a scary thing to lay your business on. So this is not really a great way to present this, but we built an SDI core on the 18th floor where our ingest systems were. All our edit systems and everything else on the other floor, the newsrooms, all the newsroom monitor feeds, came off of stuff on the 5th floor that was connected to gateways and other devices that went into the IP router. This is the IP router over here. We had a load of tie lines, and it was just basically two routers tie lined together. And the assumption was that if there was a problem with the IP router, then the core, taking a live feed, put it out, was still going to work. If there was a problem with the IP router, some of the edit systems couldn't do live ingest or live playout, but they could do file-based. So far, we've had zero problems with the IP router, I should point out. We've had no problems. All the fears turned out to be unfounded. But the division they went with, based on the fears and knowledge of late 2015, early 2016, was to separate core businesses into the known technologies. They learned a whole load of lessons in the development of this. They now know how they're going to build the next router, or the next, if they upgrade Washington or another facility. I don't think I need to go through the details of what's on each section. I think it's probably extraneous. So I'm going to jump through some of these. If anybody has any questions, if I'm making sense. So the most important thing for them on the IP side of things was the expansion path. So what we did for our core switches was we used switches with a lot of bandwidth on the uplink side, but we did not use the uplinks because we were able to size it all within one switch. We did actually 2 switches because we were doing 2022-7 redundancy. Again, because everything we were doing was based on a certain level of fear. But for expansion, you can go to, with this, you can go to a leaf and spine, and if you look at the way you expand this, this remains untouched with all your connections here. You put in your uplink to your spine, then it's very easy to hit the button and make it not let go. Let's see. To add additional leaves, you double your router capacity by simply going to the leaf, adding this. Everything running on this route, this section of the router, is unaffected with this addition. You simply have to add the new sources and destinations to the database, and now it's extensible. And where the AP is going is they're looking to add these functionalities over time and basically deprecate the SDI router now that they've proven the technology. But they were very comfortable with the build out of the technology, knowing that they were protected with the age-old, not age-old, but the proven technology. That was really, oh, come on. All I had to go over here. I was actually hoping that this was an environment where we could do some back and forth with questions.
You got a little bit of time.
A little bit of time. Anybody have any?
I'll fix this while you're doing
You do that. Any questions at all? Yes, sir.
Just out of curiosity, which vendor
Okay.
chose for the IP router?
The question was which vendor was chosen for the IP router. In this case, the AP had a standing relationship with Snell, SAM. So we went with their architecture. We also discussed some other ones, but they had an existing SAM control system for their other core in London, and we ended up tying them together. So their SDI core in London, and their SDI core in New York, and their SDI core in Washington, and their IP core in New York all spoke. So we weren't firmly locked in when we went into going with the SAM solution, but there was a built-in preference because of the ease of integrating the global solution for it. Yes, sir.
So what sort of IP bandwidth do you have between these islands of SDI routing and switches?
Okay, the switches are all connected to the gateways and other devices via 10 gig. The switches we used have 48 ports on the front of 10 gig, and they have 12 40 gig uplinks. So in other words, when you add the spine, you have full bandwidth from front port to the spine if everything is saturated. I don't know, who knows what about IP. I'm hoping that made sense to everybody. But the point was we built the switches so that you couldn't overload the local switch. As you built it out, it could grow without real limits. The bandwidth to each IPG, well, to edge devices other than IPG, it depended on what the edge device was using. Everything at a maximum of 10 gigs. We had 10 gigs to each core. The IPGs have 16 BNCs on them, or HD BNCs. Yeah, they're very much like the GV3901s or like the Evertz 570s, and they're bidirectional connections. And your issue there is managing the bandwidth. If you need a lot of outputs, you're wasting the inbound IP bandwidth from the switch, inbound from the switch perspective, but you can use it. You can use whatever you have to. We tried to balance it wherever we could to maintain best use of the bandwidth on the switches. That's really your bugaboo across any IP system. It's not managing the cross points, it's managing the bandwidth, it's maximizing, because the most expensive thing you have in your router is the backplane bandwidth of your core switches. And if you burn that because you have 1.5 gig SDI equivalent feed going to a monitor, you're burning 8.5 gigs coming back to this switch, or 8.5 gigs coming out of the switch, and you're burning 10 gigs coming back to it. You're burning 18.5 gigs for that 1.5 gig connection. It'd be like putting in, you know, a 1024 by 1024 SDI router when you need 12 by 12. You're paying for all that cross point. Effectively, that's the same thing. I kind of went off on a riff after your question, but I hope I answered your question. More?
All right, let's get on with it.
I can't believe I actually went through that. I don't have the brochure to... Somebody took the brochure, but we have a brochure with a full schedule of speakers right here, and
Great.
thank you.